Boa tarde, senhoras e senhores. Muito obrigado pelo convite para estar aqui hoje. Meu nome é Ross e minha esposa se chama Julia. Julia é uma arpista profissional com muitos anos de experiência. Ela toca harpa com as orquestras nos Estados Unidos e uma professora de harpa na Universidade Grove City College. Também. Sou um engenheiro de robótica e também faço instrumentos eletrônicos. Julia e eu desejamos falar sobre a música de Continuum em combinação com a música acústica. Nós vamos tocar instrumentos juntos hoje para vocês. Esperamos que gostem. Now the harder part, I don't have the English here. So, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Many thanks for inviting us to come here today. My name is Russ. This is my wife, Julia. Julia is a professional harpist with several orchestras in the United States. She's played for many years. She was once the principal harpist of the National Symphony of Ecuador in Quito for 4 years? 4.5 years. She's the music teacher of harp at Grove City College and has quite a few private students as well. And she plays in a couple of orchestras in Pittsburgh. She has played as substitute harpist with the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra for over 20 years. She's been on tour with them. Excuse me. She's played on tour with Andrea Bocelli. And she's a really nice person. My day job is I'm an electrical engineer in the field of robotics, but I also manufacture electronic musical instruments under the name Evaton Technologies. If you've heard of the micro CVC, that is my product. I'll just give a real brief update on that at the end of my intro here before we get started. But so Julie and I want to play for you today music that combines the continuum and an acoustic instrument. This instrument is not amplified. What you see is what you get. We hope you enjoy that. So before I get into our presentation, I thought I'd just take a couple of minutes because people have been asking about the micro CVC. As you all know, there's been a worldwide component shortage, and that has affected anyone who makes anything electronic components. So some of the components on the micro CVC have very long lead times. The digital to analog converter in particular is about 52 weeks out. So that leaves it up to me to kind of determine, well, gee, how many micro CVCs am I going to sell in the next year or so and buy them ahead. And that's the most expensive component on the board. In small quantities, they're over $27 a piece. So if I'm buying 20, 30, or 50 of them, it's for a single person, that's a substantial investment. But it's a good investment because it's a great tool. If you're not familiar, the micro CVC is a Eurorack module that allows you to translate the three-dimensional control surface of the continuum into control voltages for Eurorack. So I am continuing to make them. Don't worry, they're not going away anytime soon. I've purchased parts way into the future. There is one component that has become obsolete, but I've purchased enough of those to last at least 2 or 3 years so that Lippold and I can kind of work together and work around that part, which you already have done on your CVC, correct? That SPI bridge. Yeah. Yeah. So it's all good. If you need a micro CVC, let me know. I'm getting ready to make a new batch. I build them about six to 8 of them at a time. They are all hand soldered surface mount. And so it takes a good weekend to build a batch of them. So, but I enjoy it. I'm one of those weird people. It's like doing microscopic soldering is relaxing for me. So. Anyway, enough about that. But I did want to update since my target audience is sitting right here, right? So let me jump into the presentation. So, the question is, why are we doing this? Why would we want to combine, first of all, electronic instruments and acoustic instruments together in the same live performance? And I probably need to make a better note of this, but the thrust of this is we want to explore doing electronic music, electronic instruments and acoustic instruments together in a live performance. In this context, where there's no amplification, no electronic processing of the acoustic instrument, just the acoustic instrument as it is played in nature. So, why do I want to do that? And then more specifically, why, of all the electronic instruments in the world, why the Continuum? So, on that last question, well, and another question, I suppose, is, well, maybe if I read my slide title, why do I want to play this Continuum with an acoustic instrument instead of, with some other electronic instruments? Because it is a synthesizer. It would make sense. Let's play that in ensemble with other electronic musical instruments. And one of the reasons is that there's a large repertoire of music that's already composed for these traditional instruments. I mean, up until recently, that's all of music is for acoustic instruments. So you have this tremendous library of works that you can draw from. And another reason is that if you've got a Continuum and you're looking to go play with some friends, well, not everybody's into electronic music. There are a lot more acoustic traditional musicians than there are of us, right? And they don't have necessarily the experience with electronic instruments to say, well, yeah, you've got this cool Continuum thing, can I come play? But I don't know how to play synthesizer stuff. So, that's another reason. You say, well, let's figure out how to play with their instrument of choice. Julia and I live in a house filled with musical instruments. She has, let's just say, more than one harp. We'll leave it at that. And I have more than one synthesizer. But I can barely play Twinkle Twinkle Little Star on the harp. Julia probably does better playing my instruments than I do hers. But if we're able to play together on our native instruments, that suddenly opens up this huge possibility, an opportunity to collaborate as musicians. So, the final point here is just, we just want him to try and see what happens. So this is an experiment. We are still in progress in this experiment. I'm not going to stand up here and tell you we are now the experts at performing Continuum and acoustic instruments together, because we're not. But what we wanted to do is we started this journey when Antonio asked if I'd like to give a talk at ContinuuCon. And I first thought, well, I've already given a talk on micro CVC, I think at least twice now. So what could we do differently? And we've always wanted to perform together. If I might, there's a sort of personal story behind that. We met on this premise. A mutual friend of ours set us up. And so my side of the story was Russ, Elizabeth has this friend who just kind of wants to get together and just, maybe go to a movie or something, like not dating or anything like that, I don't know, Walter. I'm not interested. I'm just not at this point in my life. Meanwhile, Julia, what did Elizabeth tell you?
Elizabeth told me that there was this really cute guy at church, and she thought he was about 31. He was 26 at the time. I was 36 at the time, and she said, I think he's about 31. So they split the difference, and he's going to call you if it's okay about a gig. He wants to do something with harp and synthesizer.
So, of course, I knew nothing about this. And after repeated attempts by Walter to coax me into calling Julia, finally I thought, well, Walter's not going to stop until I call Julia. Fine. So I called Julia, and we have this really nice, long, pleasant conversation for, gosh, probably an hour or so. And again, I'm oblivious. I have no idea what this Harp synthesizer thing is about.
And I'm thinking, this isn't about a gig, is it?
So anyway, over a few more phone calls, we got to meet each other, and we've been married now for nearly 23 years. However, ContinuuCon 2023 is special for us for this reason. This is the first time since that phone call that we are actually going to perform harp and synthesizer.
Yeah, this is the gig. Yeah, exactly. It's all over now. Bye, honey.
So to go back to some of those original questions, so why pick the Continuum for this? I mean, I've got a room full of synthesizers. Why would I want to pick the Continuum? And I think that the Continuum is really well suited to playing in an ensemble with acoustic instruments because of a lot of the reasons that Lippold chose to design it. It's very expressive. There's a tremendous dynamic range and a huge choice of timbres that are available. And it plays like an acoustic instrument. As I'm sure, I'm somewhat preaching to the choir here at this point. But, when I first got the Continuum and started to play it, that was the first thing that really struck me. It's like, oh my goodness, because I'm a violinist. I'm a terrible violinist, but I'm a violinist. And the muscle memory, the nuance, that you use on violin, it immediately translates to Continuum. And so I got this idea in my head, this would be great to be able to play with traditional instruments, because it's not that it's going to pretend to be a traditional instrument, but that belongs beside traditional instruments, because it is an instrument. So some other reasons. Even within a single patch, you have a wide variety of timbral choices. And you can use that expressively, and you'll see, we're going to play some excerpts, and you'll see that timbral variety brings out a response in my collaborator. And Julia really noted this when we were preparing for this. When we started, this is really the story of our journey to get here. Once I get through the next slide or two, but again, we had never done this before, and that was one of the really surprising things, was that just changing the timbre and going to a different preset that allows you to explore more rich harmonics and more dynamic expression.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. How many of you have worked with Harp before? How many of you have composed for Harp? Okay. So he's talking about timbre, and the thing about Harp is we all want to be able to sustain. Okay. So I spend hours figuring out how I'm going to draw my hand away to cause or to create the illusion of sustain. So if I do this, whoop-de-doo, right? But if I do this, the visual trumps the acoustic. I'm imagining I've got a bow, right? And that's it. That's all I can do with sustain. So playing with him is great because it fulfills that need that I have to create that illusion. Now the other thing that's happening is each one of these strings generates a harmonic series, okay? And then when I'm playing with the Continuum, I can feel that the harmonic series is amplified. So it's a real rush. When he changes timbres, I'm like, ooh, my harmonic series is acting a little bit differently. And when we play this first tune, you're going to hear the notes, but what you want to listen to is what I call the bloom. Maybe you can hear it on this, I'm not sure, but listen to this note very carefully. You're going to hear the just tone generation, a second will go by, and then all of a sudden, the harp will open up and the bloom will happen, okay? See if you can hear it. Oh, bad choice. Let's try a different one. Bad choice. Sorry, let's try a different one. There it is. Did you hear it? Okay, or maybe let's try this note. Okay, anyway, it's there. It's hard. Not your heart, right? Not my, no, yeah. So anyway, back to you.
So one of the other things on the Continuum is that, even with just the red push button side, it's very quick to change presets on the Continuum. So even within a piece, you can be using different timbres throughout the piece. I don't think we have an example of doing that, but we can maybe improvise a little bit towards the end, which is really nice. So just a duo can cover a lot of territory. One really interesting thing, especially if you're a composer, is that the Continuum is still very, very new. So you're not going to go find in the music library, the music score section of the library, scores and scores and scores of music scored for Continuum. And so this is an opportunity for new music. And that's really exciting as a composer. So another question is, what acoustic instrument should we focus on if we're combining Continuum and acoustic instruments? Well, obviously we chose the harp. What repertoire to perform? These are all questions we started to ask ourselves as we were preparing this talk. What timbres should we pick on the Continuum to go with the harp? Are there some considerations on how to get the sound out of the Continuum so that it sounds as though it belongs in concert with the live acoustic instrument? And we ran through a number of things to arrive at something that sort of works. How are we going to practice together? And what would be our stage setup? This isn't too dissimilar from what we had at home. Obviously we weren't in the same space, so we're making a couple of adaptations today. Let's see, before I go back. Okay, so So we chose the Concert Grand Pedal Harp. And for the folks at Haken Audio, this is your marketing moment. Because if you think a Haken Continuum full-size slim is an expensive instrument, you ain't seen nothing yet. A brand new Concert Grand Pedal Harp today from the Lion and Healy Company in Chicago, United States, starts at $42,000 US. And you can spend more. The fact that the Continuum is an instrument of its own, and it's an instrument you can strive to become virtuosic on, it's a bargain. It's a huge bargain. And you can transport it, in the back seat of your car. You don't need a van. You don't need a dolly to wheel it around. You don't need to marry an engineer. I mean,
watch it.
But anyway, so the Concert Grand Pedal Harp, we kind of want to spend a couple minutes because I know not everyone's seen a Concert Grand Pedal Harp up close, so we can talk about it. In the Horn-Bostel-Sachs classification of instruments, it is a chordophone, meaning it is a stringed instrument with strings that are stretched under tension. Orchestrally, it's classified as pitched percussion, so it's in the percussion section. You'd think it's a string instrument, but not, because the strings are plucked. There are, on the full size, there are 47 strings, and they're stretched from the top brass frame down to the wooden soundboard. You pluck them with the tips, sort of the sides of the tips of your finger. Mm-hmm. And because there are 47 strings, but that covers, is it 5 or 6 octaves? It's
6.5.
6.5 octaves. to get the sharps and flats, the reason it's called a concert grand pedal harp, I don't know if you can turn that, Julia, that people can see, but there are 7 pedals at the base of the harp. And what those are for is to change the chromatic pitch of the string. So there are 7 pedals corresponding to the 7 notes of the scale. And so each of the 7 notes, C, C, B, D, or C, D, E, F, can be in flat, natural, or sharp.
Let me show them. Yeah, so I'm on the G string. I've got my D flat pedal up, and it's open right through here. Then this divides it, it's either 1/16 or 1/8 or 18th. I put it in the natural slot, same string, D natural, D sharp.
And that goes for all the D strings at the same time.
And the pedals controlling the little rotor on top?
Yeah, I've got a slide that shows that a little more clearly. And if you want to do electronic processing in the harp, which we're not doing today, we kind of ran out of time in prep, but you can put a piezo pickup on the back of the soundboard or use a microphone. Some harps come with 47 piezo pickups, 1 on each string. There's some issues with that, but it works. So, explaining the pedals. So, and again, here you've got this column, you've got pedals. The strings are stretched from the top to the bottom. There's a tuning pin at the top, which you use to tighten the tension on the string. That second pin is the terminus of the string in flat position. And then it goes through 2 sets of discs that have posts that stick out that can turn. And when you press the pedals, it makes the discs turn. So on this left diagram, you see the string is in flat. So it's the full length of the string can vibrate. When you put the pedal into the middle slot, that first disc turns and grabs the string and shortens it, and then and puts you into natural. And then on the far right, you see both discs are turned and clamped so that the string is at its shortest, and that gives you sharp. So if you see Julia doing a whole bunch of fancy footwork, that's what's going on. Is she's changing the sharps and flats. So then we needed to decide, well, what are we going to play? What's going to sound good together? What would be fun to play? Did we want to compose something new? Did we want to arrange a piece? Did we want to just improvise something? And one of the decisions to make is there's kind of, if you think about it, because we've got an acoustic instrument that can be processed electronically, and we've got an electronic instrument that can sound acoustic, you have this sort of timbral matrix of acoustic and electronic and various combinations, which different combinations are possible, whether they both sound like acoustic instruments, one's electronic, one's acoustic, or both. And then we did some experiments with sound reproduction of playing stereo versus mono. And it turns out that stereo felt more natural. Even if the separation wasn't great, just having the two point sources gave you some phase relationships, especially like if you're walking around the room, you don't just have that single point source. And what's kind of interesting is, what we don't have is, at home we just had a pair of studio monitors. We tried first we tried just a guitar amp sitting on the floor, and that was terrible. Continuum sounds just not great through a guitar amp. The guitar amp doesn't have a full frequency range anyway. And sitting on the floor was bad, moving it up higher helped, but then going to the stereo pair helped a lot. The owned has 2 drivers, a front side and a back side driver, and so even though you don't have a tremendous amount of stereo separation, you do have the left and right channels are represented differently, and you get interesting like phase cancellations and things as you move around. And real acoustic instruments are not point sources. I can't think of a single, well, maybe even tapping on a table. It's not a point source. So at least having stereo processing, having the Onde is a big help, giving a more natural kind of acoustic sound. Placement was very critical. Just having an amp sitting on the floor, what instrument sits on the floor? Maybe a bass sax or something. I don't know. But so when we got the speakers more to ear level, that seemed to help quite a bit. And basically, if you've got the sound system kind of at listening height, which we're kind of at, that seemed to work really well and felt more natural. We decided that we needed to do a little bit of experimentation with choosing our timbres. Kind of depends on the timbre of the instrument you're playing with, and in this case, of course, harp. Kind of a trial and error approach really seemed to work well. Some things that were surprising. We tried. You would think, Julia has many times played harp with cello, and so my first thought was, okay, our favorite preset, violin, viola, cello, bass. And turned that on, we played together, and it sounded terrible. And I think, without getting out, measuring equipment, I think it's just the overtone series of that particular patch is clashing with the harmonics of the harp. It just didn't sound good together. But we went to double reed, which at first on a monophonic amp also didn't quite work together. But once we got to a stereo setup at ear level, both double reed and sine bank horn sounded great. So we'll be showing you some of that. One of the things we're going to do is, after our first piece, we'll play another piece where we'll play the same excerpt 3 different times with 3 different presets, just so you can see kind of the difference of how the timbral choice just works differently. Just some things to consider if you want to do this on your own. You have some different challenges: the dynamic range of the instrument that you're looking at, how many octaves, the harmonic content of the instrument. I had this great idea to, I'm going to go measure the harmonic content of the harp with the spectrum analyzer and kind of be very scientific about this, but kind of ran out of time. But there's also reference material for this. Harry F. Olson wrote a book called Physics of Musical Sound back in, I want to say the 1950s. And there's a really good reference in there where he has spectrograms of kind of all the orchestral instruments, and there's also the voice ranges. It's good reference. Something that Julia mentioned, staccato versus legato instruments. The harp is, although you do have sustain, it is kind of a staccato instrument, versus like say a violin or a flute is a much more legato. And so, I'm going to predominantly be playing sort of lyrical legato patches on the Continuum. We came up with a couple of pieces that we're going to play. The first, actually the second. My slides are a little out of order, but that's okay. I'll just skip over here. Okay, so our first piece, we as well play together right now, just to show you, is an example of the acoustic instrument, the harp, playing with a very electronic sounding sound on the Continuum. This is a piece, and Julie, you want to talk about this piece?
Sure. My pronunciation may be close. I'm not sure. It's ancient Gaelic. It's called Biosha in Croatia. It's Christ is with us. This is a very old Celtic hymn. Some sources put it at 1100, as where it first appeared. We're going to play 2 verses of it, and I'm going to do kind of a more in-depth tone production in the second. The first was going to be very light. It's arranged by Andrea Melier. She's Irish, and she doesn't answer email. So I've had a student put this on a CD that we did as a fundraiser, and we asked for about 1.5 years, can we get copyright permission from you? Never heard anything from her. If she sees us on YouTube, we love your arrangement. So this is Biosha in Croatia. I can't pronounce the composer's name, but it was arranged by Andrea Melier.
Okay. So, so this piece of music is one of my favorites. It's also from one of my favorite composers, Debussy. And we're going to play an excerpt of this, and we're going to play it 3 times. So fair warning, it's an earworm. You're going to be hearing this the rest of the day. But we're going to play with 3 different presets. The first is the double reed, which is very, very oboe-like. And let's turn this up just a touch. This is the one thing that's really tricky with doing continuum with acoustic is matching volume. When I was at home, and it's a matter of getting things set up right, but I use this K-Mix, which is a mixer that has a really nice interface. It's got a compressor and so forth in it. Don't really need the compressor on the continuum, but when we were running the harp through a pickup into and mixing the 2 together, the harp has a huge dynamic range, and you really need to compress the harp. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yeah, so as I say, the harp has such a huge dynamic range, even though the continuum has a fantastic dynamic range as well. Had to run a little bit of compression to get the amplified harp to come out correctly. But we're not doing amplified harp today, so I just wanted to show you this.
Ready?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just tell you what the next patch is when we're done here. Sure. Go ahead.
I got to tune one thing.
Okay. So advantage continuum. I'm not retuning.
Okay.
Oh. So that's the double reed preset, and as you saw, I kind of had to adjust the volume a little bit just to get the balance between the 2 instruments right. And that's if you are going to play with an acoustic instrument, that's the one thing you really have to juggle. So let me make sure I've got the right next preset here. Yeah. So this is I believe it was Eric von Bayer's V brass patch. So Eric, if you're out there watching, thank you. Shall we?
Okay.
Oh, and there's more expression in the Y direction on this. And so see if you can tell how Julia responds differently to that from the double reed, which has no variation in Y. And for this final replay of the same passage, this is how I first heard this piece. There's a famous electronic music composer, performer, and I'm sure it'll be quite evident to everyone by the end of this, but I'll have someone give a guess.
Sorry? Darn it. Okay.
Thank you for indulging my inner 12-year-old.
So I kicked the wrong pedal, and I hit the side of it, and it went up, and the one I was trying to do it didn't go, and I was in the wrong key, and I'm going to blame it on the harp. So.
Okay. You want to talk a little bit about this piece?
Oh, sure, sure. When I was about 14 or 15, we went over to Ohio University. It was about an hour west, and they had a special harp program with a wonderful harpist. He was born in Cuba. He came from Paraguayan folk harpist, Alfredo Rolando Ortiz. Some of you may know him or know of him. And when he was a young man, which was about the same time, he was in this country, and he was promoted by a guy that owned a bar in the middle of the redwoods, and the bar was called Zayante, and he got to be very good friends with the bar owner. He did like over 30 concerts there, and one day he said, well, what was this Zayante? Why is this called this? And the bar owner said this was an ancient tribe that had lived there and had disappeared, and they didn't know where it had gone, but there were these natural arches, and then there were some man-made arches out in a secret part in the redwood forest. So he's like, okay, I want to see this. So the bar owner took him, and they went out, and they found the arches. And they walked through the first arch, and suddenly they found themselves in a meadow that was full of millions of butterflies, monarch butterflies in migration, which they hadn't been able to see before. So he was so moved by the experience, and he says, I'm going to write a piece about what just happened. So this is Zayante by Alfredo Rolando Ortiz. Well, he's a wonderful guy. He's like the guru of the folk harp, Latin American folk harp community. He's just wonderful. One of my students just did this piece on her senior recital, and I called him up because I had lent out my book that had the piece in it, and I wanted program notes, and we couldn't find them anywhere, so I just called him up, and he told me that story. So that's all very fresh. So. Okay.
Yeah. So make sure I got, okay. Make sure I've got the right preset.
And thanks to Antonio and Sophia for the harp, very much.
Any questions for us? Perguntas?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
So do you grow your nails out at times? There's a really nice staccato. Are you using nails or are you plucking?
Oh, it's like right on the edge, but my fingers are there. I just did a week of vacation before I got here, so it's not as nasty as it should sound.
Do you
So,
grow your nails out?
no, not really. I try to keep them about where they are right now. I want a little because it adds a little support. So if I cut them completely down, that flesh on the end is a little unstable. So I want them exactly this long.
But you don't use your nail detachers at all?
Not with this harp. With the Latin American harp, you do. And at one time I was trying to grow my nails asymmetrically. I was down in Ecuador studying Latin American folk harp, but I was also playing the Mozart concerto with the symphony. So I was trying to have my nail shear off like that, so I could use the nail for the Latin American harp and then play Mozart with the other side of my finger, and it did not work at all. It was bad. So I had to give up and clip them before the concert. Yeah.
Any questions for the harp mover?
I just did a $42,000 harp at Portsmouth.
That is thanks to Antonio and Sophia. They were able to acquire this harp from the conservatoire,
Yeah.
and brought it here for
Yeah.
us.
From the Philharmonic.
Yeah,
So-
Thank you,
yeah.
So we're very grateful to both of you,
Yeah, thank you.
to provide this for us to be able to do this, because this would be impossible otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we ever move here, I will have to unstring my harps, put them, and I'm really scared about it. I don't know whether I put them in a shipping container. What if that shipping container gets left out in the sun, you know? Or do I try to get a berth on the Queen Elizabeth II? I don't know if it's still going. Put all my harps in there. I don't know.
We'll talk.
I can see what you were saying, Sally, when we were talking earlier about putting the continuum kind of.
I'm going to talk about that right
Oh,
now.
good.
Yeah. Is that the next slide?
That is the next slide. So yes, we're